Welcome to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast. And you're very welcome back to the Hawkeye Sidekick Hurling podcast with your host Mark Kennedy, joined this week by Kieran Collins. Kieran, how are things?
Good, Mark, yourself?
Sure, grand. But I suppose tonight Kieran will focus in on the Allianz Hurling League. The semi-finals in Division 1 took place last weekend. Limerick and Kilkenny advanced. We'll have a review of those games. We'll also look at Westmeath's victory over Laois, securing Division 1 status for next season. We'll look at Division 2A, semi-final between Offaly and Kildare, an interesting clash in Tullamore. And also we'll run the rule over the teams, essentially in 1A, 1B, and also maybe 2A if we have the time as well. I suppose, Kieran, we'll start from the start. I suppose Saturday night in the TUS Gaelic grounds in Limerick entertained Tipperary, a nice feisty affair to start off the league semi-finals.
It really was, Mark, yeah, and I suppose it was as close to championship pace we've seen this year so far. I think the intent of the Tip team that were going to come, or how hard they were going to come at Limerick was before the ball was even thrown in the handbags before, but Tipperary were really, really impressive, especially first half. They brought a real intensity, they fronted up and they were just in Limerick's face the whole way through. I suppose really good cameos for like Alan Tynan, really, really good game midfield. Jason Ford as well, he's been on top form the league campaign, and I suppose he was everywhere in that first half. I think Limerick were maybe slow to get up to pace, but it's probably they held with them. They stayed with Tip, and I suppose 4 points margin. It's not a huge score in hurling. With Tip or Limerick came out in the second half, and they just went up a couple of gears. They adapted to how Tip were playing. I think Peter Casey had a really, really good second half. Just came a lot deeper than he had been and got a lot of ball. I just think the intensity Limerick went to, I think they just kind of blew Tipperary away, outscored them 116 to 9 points in the second half. I think Tipperary kind of just had no answers as far as really 12 different scores from Limerick, from 4 to 15 got on the scoreboard, our jersey numbers. So, really, really impressive. And I think in the second half especially, Limerick were 100% accurate with their shooting, bar the final ball was one that let them down. So, that's something that would have been an Achilles heel for Limerick, especially in years gone by, would have been shooting accuracy. So to see that for me is really impressive. And I think as well, just to see Keenan back to his best, just a headache in around the middle area there. Just, he's probably the pound for pound, I think, the best hurler in the country at the minute. And just good to see him getting back to his best. He's really going to add another dimension for Limerick this year that we didn't have last year. It's good times to be a Limerick supporter now. Yeah, I just thought it was a cracking contest from minute one, and I think you have to give full credit to Tipperary as well for providing such a stiff opposition for Limerick. I mean, that first half-wise, Kieran, you touched on, I thought Alan Tynan really came into his own, even at the start of the throw, and really set the marker down to Will O'Donoghue early. And, he chipped in with the 4 points, but I thought, linked play so superbly well along with Conor Stakelum. I suppose Barry Hogan as well in goal from Killadangan as well. I thought his puckouts were absolutely superb, really identifying players in space. Gearóid O'Connor and Jason Ford particularly was gaining an awful lot of traction there, particularly in the first half. I suppose Ford finishing up with 14 points, Gearóid O'Connor with 3 points as well. Noel McGrath straightened things very well. And also kind of the middle third as well was kind of really stopping Limerick from developing anything. So I suppose overall for Liam Cahill and Michael Bevins, I mean, sure, there's a loss there, but particularly the first half, they can really be positive in terms of how they perform, particularly in that first half, Kieran. Yeah, I think it's something I mentioned earlier in the league was how Tipperary have, I could see, targeted the puckouts as an area of interest, because you're really impressive, especially, I think it was the Kilkenny game earlier in the league where they stood out for me. And again, in that first half against Limerick, they found areas of space. And as you said, the puckouts were just darts, they were arrows, like straight to hand. In this day and age, possession game, puckout is crucial. I think both Tip and Limerick have a really, really good the puckout conversion rate. It was up in the 70%, which is very good. But I think what Limerick did differently in the second half was they closed down that space, and they kind of changed that. Tipperary didn't have the same space. The ball wasn't going in to players unmarked, and I think in a way it probably left Tip kind of a little bit flabbergasted, what's happened here, where we're getting this endless supply of ball in the first half, and I don't think they adapted to what Limerick had done in the second half to close up in that space.
Yeah, and I think maybe a bit of wear and tear was probably entering into it, particularly in that third quarter as well, Kieran. An awful lot of energy and effort. Like, I wasn't at the game, but seeing the likes of Valentine and guys like that, you could see they were actually maxing out here after 35, 40 minutes. And I thought Limerick's middle third really did kind of ascend dominance, really. I mean, there was a point there from Coughlin. There was an exchange of passes, running through the lines. It really seemed to be really kind of one-way traffic. I suppose I can read the stat out: 35th minute to 60th minute, Limerick won 14, Tipperary 4 points. Really told the tale of the tape, didn't it, Kieran? I mean, we can talk about the 12 outfield players for Limerick scoring, but I mean, every line, I thought half-back line, every line really did really go up another level, particularly in that period here, Kieran.
Oh, absolutely, it did. Yeah, they went from a team that were playing in second gear to fourth gear, from first second half. And I think with that rise in intensity, I think it just left Tip with no answers. And that scoring stat that tells the story of the second half. I think the goal probably made the result a little bit more comfortable at the time. But I think midway through that second half, I think it was clear to see that Limerick would have been comfortable winners at that time in there.
Half-back line was really cleaning up, wasn't it? I mean, Declan Hannon was really orchestrating an awful lot of things. He scored 2 lovely points as well from play. Tom Morrissey got into the game. Colin O'Neill, I thought, had a super game in terms of his work rate and really his interlinking play, particularly from the half-back line and forward line. That was absolutely superb. I mean, what can you say about Barry Nash as well? Just, again, an awful lot of these guys came to the fore, particularly after the restart. And, I mean, it's just emphatic. And I suppose the goal that Peter Casey scored, very opportunistic. Maybe exposed a bit of naivety in that Tipperary full back line for Casey to get in behind. But, I mean, opportunistic finish, and I suppose that really did spell the end for Tipperary.
I suppose it's highlighted an area of weakness possibly for Tipperary going into the championship. And, I think they'd like to see the likes of Cathal Barrett coming back from injury, slot into that full back line. We mentioned it earlier in the year when he went out injured. Michael Breen, if he does line out there full back, he's probably inexperienced in today's game. So to have the experience of likes of Barrett or maybe Craig Morgan back in as well in there, to steady up the ship there, because I think Cahill would have, I think it was Johnny Ryan was marking Casey, or he probably should have stopped Casey in his tracks to get that ball. But I think when Tipper back to full strength, which is something we have to mention, Tipper without a lot of personnel at the minute as well due to injury. So I think if you're Liam Cahill looking at the game, yeah, okay, it's a loss, but there'll be a lot of positives to come out of the game to look at Tipperary from where they were this time last year to where they are this time to now. They're like two different teams. They have a good mix of probably young and old. As we said, personnel missing due to injury. Once they come back, I think Tipperary will do okay in this round robin in the championship.
Yeah, absolutely. They really did give it everything. I think credit to Tipperary, they went until the end. I think other teams would have really accepted their fate, taking a 7-8 point loss. But I mean, Tipperary kept going until the final whistle. Damage had been well and truly done. I suppose the likes of Barry Heffernan probably come back into the reckoning in terms of maybe full back slot or midfield. But again, he's only really starting heavy training after his knee layoff. Cathal Barrett, I think, is the one here. But it'd be interesting just to see where Liam Cahill does slot him in. I think he was looking more from a midfield perspective, but I suppose Conor Stakelum and Alan Tynan looked like the first choice guys there for Tipperary. I mean, Alan Tynan really has impressed me enormously. The former young Munster rugby man. I mean, he doesn't lack for physicality anyway, and he's continued his club former Ross Gray into the intercounty scene this year. So it's a good find for Liam Cahill and Michael Bevins.
Yeah, and I suppose he's not the only player you could highlight. For this year, I think along with Grode O'Connor and Brian O'Mara as well, and you're talking 3 guys who are going to play up the spine of the team. So, I think if Cahill going forward builds the Tipperary team around these guys. Tipperary won an All-Ireland minor last year. There's young guys coming as well. So I think, these 3 guys I just mentioned are around for a long number of years. Tipperary, I don't think you're going to see what happened last year happen again too soon.
Absolutely, and then you can throw in maybe Connolly from Lockmore Castellani, who's out extended leave as well. I mean, Brian McGrath as well hasn't really had much of a look in as well. I mean, talking to a few Tipperary guys straight after the game here in Galway, it was kind of a case of, Dan McCormick's in at wing back, Seamus Kennedy in half forward has been maybe a bit of switching and swapping there a little bit, maybe to think just the balance is maybe just a little bit off. But I mean, Bonner, they're definitely, the workhorse in that half forward line. But I suppose Noel McGrath, just to get him involved, I mean, third quarter wise, was kind of, it was maybe a forlorn task for Noel McGrath, but really Noel McGrath seems to be very much a fulcrum here for the Tipperary forward line, particularly for the likes of Ford, given that Seamus Cannon's in a race against time to even get into the Munster Senior Hurling Championship setup.
Yeah, I think that'll raise questions when Callan is back fit as well. I don't see room for Noel McGrath, Callan and Bonner in the same team. I don't think you can also afford to have, the work rate Bonner is bringing you, but you're lacking the score and forward as such. Like Bonner hasn't been putting his work onto the scoreboard. So, going forward, can you afford to have like two players similar in the forward line? I don't know. But I suppose Cahill will look at, he has choice, and across the half back line and across every line, you could say they have choice, and I suppose in today's game with a strong panel, it's not uncommon for teams to spring players in different positions. We see Kilkenny doing it. Patrick Walsh come back to corner back. We saw Limerick a couple of years ago bringing, Kyle Hayes back to wing back, and I suppose at the time it throws opposition teams, but I suppose as I'm trying to make is it's not uncommon.
And I mean, Conor Bowe probably comes into that wing forward position as well for Tipperary as well. So, I mean, for Tipperary, I think it's been overall a pleasantly positive league experience. They've identified one or two players. And I suppose that game against Clare in the first round is really going to be pivotal. I suppose looking at Limerick here, Kieran, you think of the players that are on the subs bench on Saturday night. Again, from a John Kiley, Paul Kinnerk perspective, what a nice problem to have going into an Allianz Hurling League final, just in terms of the competition for places. That the first 15 really did kind of really assert themselves in his fixture. So competition will be pretty high for that final in Páirc Uí Chaoimh on Sunday week.
Yeah, I suppose if you look at the starting 15 for the All-Ireland final last year, you're also going to add to it, Cian Lynch, Peter Casey, Shane O'Brien this year, Donegal Dawley, guys that have had a really good league campaign. Adam English. I think Cathal O'Neill has really impressed me in the few games he's played, especially the latter part of the league. He was injured the early part. These guys are putting their hands up, and I think as well from Kiley, like 4 points down at the weekend, Kyle Hayes on the bench, Grot Hegarty on the bench, and he didn't spring him at half time, which is a sign that, I trust the 15 guys taken to the field, and he backed them in a way, and it's unreal strength and depth. And I suppose you'd like to think that come the Crunch Championship that these guys have, the younger guys like Shane O'Brien, Donegal Dawley, have gained experience to be brought in if needed or start, whatever way Kyle sees. But, you'd imagine come Championship, Kyle Hayes and Hegarty will start. But these guys like Shane O'Brien, Donegal Dawley, to be bringing them in as subs, where there is a demand on them coming in as subs. Like Kiley has made no bones about it. Like, he expects a return from players coming on. If you're a Limerick player, no matter who you are or what position you play, your jersey isn't safe. I think it's looking like you look across the half back line. You've Kyle Hayes, Declan Hannon, Diarmaid Burns, Dan Morrissey, Colin Coughlin. So two of them guys are going to be sitting on the bench come first championship game against Waterford. So there's decisions to be made, obviously, but I suppose complacency doesn't set in when you have selection choices like that.
Oh, absolutely. Then couldn't have even thrown midfield. Barry Murphy, I thought, had a very solid cameo, came in late for Darragh O'Donovan, and I didn't think put a foot wrong, contributing to scoring stakes as well. So, I mean, you're kind of looking across these lines here, and even Dan Morrissey, Mr. Versatility in the back line, can't get his game. I mean, that's really showing the stature of that Limerick squad depth. I mean, you touch on Donegal O'Dawlick here as well. How did you feel his performance was last weekend? It was his first start, but from my perspective, I thought he acquitted himself quite well, given the circumstances.
Yeah, he has, and any game I've seen him in the league so far, he's scored every game. He's been strong, and I think you could compare Shane O'Brien the same way as well. Young guys coming in, not phased by the team they're coming into, just kind of slotting in. They're really, really impressive. Obviously Pat Ryan has been released from the panel, so perhaps a shortage in that area, but like two great guys to have in, and you know, they're only going to get better.
You kind of look at the scoring from the weekend. Aaron Gillan, 8.7 from frees. Dermot Burns as well, you know, coming big with his free taking and his open play with 6 points. Peter Casey 1-2. So, but it was just a distribution of scores, and I think just particularly second half how scores were created. It was just so well constructed and well worked that I think it's all one of signs for the rest of the chasing pack, to be perfectly fair. So Limerick advanced to the final where they're going to face Kilkenny and UPMC Nolan Park. Now, I was excited going into this game, Kieran, I won't lie, given the fireworks that we've seen in TUS Gaelic grounds on Saturday night, but didn't really live up to the expectation here, Kieran, did it? I mean, what did you feel about the performance of Kilkenny, but also Cork as well? I thought maybe a big opportunity for Cork missed to get into a league final.
I think there's one thing that I come away with, that doesn't matter what Kilkenny team plays or what players take to the pitch, you're going to get the same work rate, intensity, and attitude, no matter who plays or who's over them, what management team is over them. You know, Kilkenny, the attitude is unbelievable, and that's the difference between Cork and Kilkenny the weekend was work rate, especially in their forwards. Cork looked like Cork of old, really, didn't they? When the pressure came on, started passing them over and back the field as they had been last year. I think the one moment that stuck out for me was when Kieran Joyce was penalised for overcarrying, because like there was no options, no forward made a run, and that's the Cork we were slating last year. And you know, I think if you're a Cork fan, you know, so much hype and so much, I suppose, hope really, and this has knocked them back a good bit, I suppose, in expectations. I suppose we all expected a different Cork, you know, younger Cork coming through, but you know, after the weekend, you couldn't be at all convincing Cork, and yeah, they've been unbeaten in the league so far, and they probably played the bones of two different teams. But I think for Pat Ryan, you know, even if I sat down with a pen and paper there, I couldn't even pick the first 15 for Cork. You know, they have so many options, but that's something we've highlighted as well, is like hurlers that are very similar, you know, real problems and inconsistency. And I didn't know what to make of Cork this year up to now, but I really would be worried for Cork for the round robin.
There is vulnerability there, I think, right now. And again, you take the early season optimism, beat Limerick by a point, they go away to Galway, get a keynote win. But since then, there's been an awful lot of very much topsy-turvy squad selections. And Pat Ryan had to basically look at his squad depth, but maybe he's unsettled the team pattern a little bit here. I'm just thinking in terms of the Westmeath game. Wexford as well, really, on another day, could have actually got a result there. And then the Clare game was an unmitigated challenge game. There was really no intensity. So coming into this game, a league final at stake and potentially a Páirc Uí Chaoimh league final, if you think about it, I think, you know, there's plenty of motivation. 34 years since Cork have won a league title. That's unforgivable for a county of Cork's stature. But as you said here, Kieran, you hit nail on the head. I think the old middle third, I thought, were completely and utterly routed during the game. Half back line for Cork really didn't set a platform. Half forward line were living on scraps. Conor Lahan was really struggling to kind of get into the game. I think Barrett probably from Cork, from an attacking sense, is probably the standout. But looking across that Kilkenny middle third, I thought to a man they won their jewels quite convincingly. And I think the 6-point win, it probably flattered Cork, to be perfectly fair, just given how the proceedings went.
Yeah, I think Rob Downey in stages played well, wing back. I think Joyce is turning to be a really, really good centre back and will be for years to come. But I think the forwards, Barrett, obviously, you know, I think I would agree, played well. But the forwards want to run a goal and score. They don't seem to want to put in the same effort that other inter-county teams are putting in defensively. And I think that showed, you know, different facets during the game. Like, Kilkenny were not full strength by any means. You know, Kilkenny didn't have TJ Reid, Owen Cody, Adrian Mullen. You know, you add in Richie Reid, add in all these guys, and that's a stronger Kilkenny team. So, facing a team, Cork also had the advantage of not being out first week of round robin. So they have, you know, there's a lot of talk of a 2-week break between league final and first week of round robin. Cork have a rest week first week, so they actually have a 3-week break. So another advantage to try and progress to the final. I think you look at Kilkenny had 30 shots from play, Cork had 19. I think Conor Lehan really, really poor, really poor. Like you hear Cork people saying, "Oh, we the days of Horgan and Harnedy, they need Harnedy more now than they ever did. Centre forward, winning ball. There's no ball winners in that team. Decky Dalton impressed early games in the league, poor a couple of games since. Don't know if he's going to call it for him. Yeah, just they seem to be Cork players are happy when they're running that goal. They have speed. They're very, very good hurlers. But in the modern game and the game of today, it's not all about good hurling. It's work rate. And all over the field. And I just think Cork did not bring that. And then when the pressure came on, they just reverted back to the old, balls over and back to field. They were just rudderless, basically, when Kilkenny. And Kilkenny, I wouldn't say played exceptional, just they worked their socks off like they always do. And, you and Billy Drennan, what a find for, 113 and 100% accuracy from frees, which is, it's unbelievable for a young guy from any distance, really. Massey Keown, as well. Donnelly had a very good game. And Kilkenny are building, they're a work in progress, but they're adapting to the mix of the short game and some long balls in as well. But I think they're really, they've been impressive. I don't think were they up to full scratch or up to what they can be on Sunday, no. Which I suppose for Pat Ryan is more worrying that, they were miles off this Kilkenny team.
I mean, you look at Kilkenny, they started Richie Hogan for the first time in a match since 2020. Did quite well. I thought Paddy Deegan has been very prominent for Kilkenny in this league. You said it there a few weeks ago. He plays wing forward for his club. Paramount to Massey Keown's goal. Identifies, goes for the throat. Could have taken an easy point. Sees Keown inside, bang, goal. Game-defining moments here. I mean, Cork literally had 12 goals coming in. They were very goal-savvy, but I mean, all credit to Mikey Butler. I mean, Thomas Walsh, Pádraig Walsh didn't give a sniff. So, I mean, an awful lot of good things here for Derek Ling and his management staff to work on. I thought the short pass game actually evolved as the game went on. And obviously, the direct game is there for full effect. I mean, you counted Cody, Mullen, the Reeds here. I mean, when they come back in, they'll be absolutely live threats on both sides of the ball. So, I think, Kieran, this league final between Kilkenny and Limerick, I think it's going to be one hell of a match down in Cork. I mean, Kilkenny, I thought, had a few gears still to go. I mean, we can talk maybe about the Owen Downey red card. At least that sparked a little bit of life in the game. I mean, there was that flashpoint beforehand with Billy Drennan going straight through on goal and getting taken out of it for the penalty. It kind of stirred things for about 10 minutes maybe. But I thought Kilkenny just were kind of completely on top. Even before the Owen Downey red. What did you think of that decision?
Yeah, I've seen the clip back. I think he was unlucky. There was a lot went on in probably was 2 minutes of madness, really. But a lot went on, and to pick up one man for red card probably was a little harsh if you compare to what happened in the Limerick Tipperary match the night before. Yeah, I think we need to be very, very careful how we continue on with, I suppose, social media relating to games after they're completed, because I suppose there's been a couple of instances the last few weeks where David Fitzgerald Leclerc, obviously 2 head strikes, red card, which has been upheld. You've Owen Downey, which is a strike, and it's a red card, which I think is looking to be upheld as well. There's one, I think it's this social media bashing afterwards. I think there's no argument, like if a referee had seen the incident with O'Donoghue, it would have been a red card. But I think you could also make a justification for Tynan. He was the aggressor in this. He threw a blow similar to what Owen Downey threw and had a red card for. So I just think we need to be very careful how we approach this, because we're all for calling for player bans when it's not our team, and then kind of defending our players when it is our team. So be careful what you wish for. I think there's one journalist for Clare FM who was for a week sharing mad about trying to get David Fitzgerald off the offence that he saw the red card for, and then after the Limerick Tipperary game, shouting for a red card for Will O'Donoghue and for a ban, and a day after calling for Alan Tynan to be banned. So I think we just need to be careful how we go about this in the long run. I think, from my view, I think if it's not seen in 70 minutes by the referee, I think that should be the end of it, because we all know with the GA, there's no inconsistency. Consistency with the GA. Like in reality, Owen Downey is looking at a one-match ban for an offence that Alan Tynan completely, very same offence Alan Tynan did against Will O'Donoghue. Obviously Will O'Donoghue's striking top of that, and they've got away scot-free. So where is the consistency in it all?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there, Kieran, because I know last year I was a bit of a critic in terms of disciplinary panel, the transparency of what's going on. How many games will be going on in the championship in the next few weeks, particularly in the lower tier championships? Where are the flashpoints? There's obviously going to be flashpoints in these games, but you'll never hear about them. And this is kind of, midweek Wednesday, and then you get a press release out there in the middle of nowhere and say, oh, there's cases to be answered for. And you're kind of like, well, look, I think the referee report has to be paramount here, Kieran. If it's not included on the referee's report, you move on. I would have it, in terms of your officials, your fourth officials, whatever. You maybe have an adjudication after the game, and give a press release then saying maybe there's a case to answer for. It happens in other kind of sports. I've kind of alluded to rugby league an awful lot. It's a good system in terms of, you're on report. You have a case to answer. You mightn't have a suspension after it, but let's set expectations even on the day of the game, what's going on. This kind of few days, I would totally agree with you, Kieran. It can't continue here. And I would also constitute, are all games being looked at? I'd say the answer is no. It's just the major flashpoints here. So I think that from that perspective, I think there's an awful lot that the GAA could do from a governance perspective on the disciplinary panel. They're wide open in terms of rule interpretations, but I mean, just even for governance, how things are being legislated, I think there is food for thought, I would think, there for sure. I suppose, Kieran, we'll get back to it here in terms of the other teams within 1A and 1B. I suppose what stood out for you? I mean, looking at in terms of Galway, Wexford, Clare here, what are the initial thoughts here of the league campaign for those three?
Yeah, I suppose for Wexford, it's been a poor year results-wise if you compare it to last year's league where they went unbeaten for the 5 games. But I suppose, strip it all back, they've been heavily blighted by injury, especially the key players. But in turn, it's forced Dara Egan to try younger players. And I suppose with mixed results, really, Wexford need the top guns all fit to be competitive. There is, I think, serious concern for Wexford in the next few years. There's a number of players on the wrong side of 30, and I just think when these lads step away, I can't see who's there to replace. I think the Wexford GAA need to act quick. Just looking at school level, schools aren't involved in any major competitions. Fitzgibbon competitions, limited amount of Wexford players playing these competitions, so I think they need to act fast. But I think Wexford, get players back. They will be competitive for the round robin, and I do think they will be one of the top 3 teams in Leinster. But after last progression wise, it's hard to see. But I think it's been a kind of a mixed league for Dara Egan. I think for Galway, one of these teams where they haven't shown a whole pile. They've tried a few younger players. Kind of impressed with Liam Collins, McManus, really impressive. But switching players, new positions. They've had Conor Whelan out around centre forward and things like that. But to me, I think they're a bit of an unknown going into the championship. I think a lot of people would have had Galway as favourites to take Leinster, but seeing Kilkenny for the last few weeks, I think Kilkenny will have put a test on them, and I think that game will be huge. But look, Galway are strong. They have serious players, serious depth, and I expect to be fit and ready for championship. And I think with Clare, Lohan knows this team. He's with them 4 years. It's they have a bank of players. I suppose the advantage of having Aidan McCarthy back this year, and hopefully we see more Mark Rogers. They've had a poor league, I think, on compared to other teams, but I can see them being fit and ready to go for championship. I'd be very, very surprised if Clare were one of the 3 to come out of Munster.
Kind of agree with you with those sentiments there, certainly, Kieran. I suppose talking about Wexford, I suppose the only thing really from Dara Egan and the selector's perspective, at least they know what the depth chart's like in Wexford. It's not as if they didn't give opportunities to fringe guys, prospects. I think at Banville, particularly in Wexford, McGuckin as well seemed to impress, but others may not have taken the opportunity. And as you say, the loyal lieutenants, the Lee Chins of this world, McDonald's, Rory Connor's probably a big one to get fully fit, to come in and make an impact in Leinster. I will be key. But I suppose Darragh Egan had to run the rule. We saw it last season in terms of the Clare quarter-final All-Ireland, where the last 10-15 minutes they had nothing off the bench and it proved decisive. I suppose Galway here, David Burke out with the ACL. I hope this is not the end of his intercounty career, but again, his age, it's not looking good. I think that's a big blow for Galway, just for leadership perspective. I do see them getting into the All-Ireland series for sure, being a bit of a live threat. Again, Daithí Burke at centre half back, Gearóid McInerney at full back. I think that might be an intriguing subplot. They won't be far off, I don't think, Galway, to be fair. And I think Clare, we know that they have the forwards. The capability is there. Tony Kelly, the Aidan McCarthy's. We haven't seen Shane O'Donnell. I just worry for them defensively. Have they really identified anyone net new to come in and really make an impact? I don't think Brian Lohan has really identified anyone really in the back line to really push anyone from last season's championship team out, really. So, again, I would say Clare maybe will be a top three, but I think maybe some old failings might happen, particularly if John Conlon were to go down with injury again, who's the half-back here. So I think that's going to be an intriguing subplot.
Also going to be missing, obviously, David Fitzgerald for the Tipperary game, which is, huge game. So, you lose your first game and the pressure's on straight away, and he'll be one of the main guys there, so that'll be a huge hole to fill for him.
And I suppose, looking at 1B, we've talked about Tipperary and Kilkenny at length here. I suppose Waterford, Dublin, Antrim. I know, folks, we're going to get to the Westmeath Laois game in due course. But I suppose Waterford, Dublin and Antrim here, I suppose reflections for their league campaigns here, Kieran?
I think Waterford, I really don't know what to make Waterford. Looking at the league game, as they stepped up in degree of hardness as they're coming up. Starting with the likes of Antrim and that, but finishing off with Tipperary and Kilkenny, and they didn't impress. I think there might be a possibility of discipline issues. Was it 4 or 5 red cards over the league? A huge question on the game plan and a serious lack of goals. I know you might say Limerick don't shoot the lights out goals wise, but they're working to a system that seems to be fine tuned, and points from play are what their target is. We just don't know what Davy is. It's all a mirror for the championship. Is he trying to hoodwink us all? But Dessie Hutchinson playing where he was, having zero to no influence compared to what he should be doing. The players are in Waterford. I think now is the time. If they have any aspiration to win All Ireland, this is the year. They're guys in their prime, really. Ozzie Gleeson, Dessie Hutchinson, Ty de Burka. These guys, they're battle hardened. They've experience, and this Waterford team, if they have any aspirations, and don't want to hear what Davy says about this is year 1 of year 3 or whatever. Like this team has been around, and I think now is the time, and it's shit or get off the pot.
I think maybe holding some bits back, but they're gonna need players back fully fit. I mean, I think Austin Gleeson particularly in that Tipperary game in Central Stadium, I think clearly wasn't 100%. So why would you play him? Why would you risk him for a potential hamstring scare? Conor Prunty as well, I think, is a fundamental player back in the defensive line, because we saw very quickly against Tipperary that this backline can be got at. I can see Davy probably deploying sweeper systems, probably much to the detriment of Waterford supporters who like nice, direct, fluid hurling. Mightn't be the case. I think Waterford are just a true enigma. It'll be interesting to see how they approach that opening round game. It's against Limerick in Thurles. And I mean, Thurles should suit Waterford. This is a team, Callum Lyons. There's pace aplenty in these lines. So I would just hope for Waterford's sake, you may be thinking about it a little bit too much, just go for it. I think, that should be in our mantra, but whether Davy really goes with that and goes very structured might inhibit him a little bit. I think that's the intriguing subplot for Munster, really. I suppose in terms of Dublin here, Kieran, I mean, Donald Burke aside, I'm still wondering here in terms of who's a formidable forward line player that can maybe support Donald Burke in Dublin's Leinster hurling quest.
Alex Considine maybe played a part in a few games. Yeah, I think they're heavily reliant on Donald Burke. Ronan Hayes, who had a very good year last year, I think they need to get him back in the pitch. But it's very hard to see what Dublin have gained from the league. They were very good against Antrim at home, but then they let Antrim back into the game. They were comfortable. They were very, very good on the day, and I suppose that would be a huge question mark to me, that they switched off and let Antrim back into the game. And had there been another 5 minutes, God knows what would have happened. I just think if Donald Duck doesn't play, I think you'd wonder where the scores are going to come from. There is youth coming, as you said earlier off air, Mark, they have a good minor team. I think, to be fair to Micheál O'Donoghue, he has tried a lot of players, but they're, young guys. It probably is a bit of a project. I think, I probably expecting a lot from Dublin this year, but I think for Micheál O'Donoghue, this is going to be maybe a 2-3 year plan. So I suppose it's early days on their path, but you kind of would worry about Dublin for the round robin. I think if Wexford get the old reliables back in, no, albeit Dublin are playing Wexford at home, I think that's the game of the round robin for me. I think because I think winner that takes the third spot in Leinster for me.
Just fundamentally, skill set wise, Dublin have to show so much better in terms of their skill set, their first touch. Just thinking in terms of that Kilkenny match in UPMC, Nolan Park, where they were nowhere near it in terms of the skill set. And Kilkenny won with relative ease. So I think from Micheál O'Donoghue, I think it is very much a fact-finding season. As you say, that Parnell Park fixture with Wexford will make or break the season, I would think. But there's a few guys there, like Danny Sutcliffe. There's guys there that are kind of getting to the end of their intercounty careers here. And I think, to be fair to these guys, one final push, they're not going to be wanting to be listening to side and transition here. So I think the likes of Alex Considine, the forward line around Donald Burke, really have to step up massive here if they're going to be anyway a factor in Leinster, to be perfectly fair. I suppose Kieran Antrim as well. They got their win against Laois in Corrigan Park. Ran a few teams close, namely Kilkenny. Waterford, they had a good performance with 14 players. I suppose reflections there from an Antrim perspective. Can they get into Leinster with a bit of optimism?
Yeah, I think you could add the Dublin game into that as well. Dublin were on top in that game, but Antrim really pushed them towards the end. Yeah, Kilkenny game, played in. I think they've had some really impressive performances. They seem to be slowly building year on year. I think the biggest negative for Antrim is geography, where they are in the country. They're so far away from hurling counties regarding getting games. We saw it in years gone by where they've been impressive and then, lost the game that they had to win. But, saw off Laois, secured hurling Division 1 for next year. And, I think they'll fancy themselves. They'll fancy a scalp. I think they'll fancy, they'll target one or two games, but, it would be hard to see them doing anything in the championship for me. But I think it's been a good year, but you'd expect more building on that next year. And probably, fifth or sixth term for Derek Leeson up there. So,
indeed,
obviously they're doing good work up there. But, I think there's still a bit of a bridge to gap between where Antrim are at and the top counties are at.
Exactly. No, I think Darren Gleeson has done an incredible job up there. But again, there's a vibrant club scene up there. I mean, we've seen it with Dunloy at the start of the year, particularly, beating Schnottneil in the Ulster final. I thought was a major scalp, given Schnottneil's dominance in Ulster senior hurling. And then to beat St. Thomas and all that. They have the capability here. Thinking of the likes of Keelan Minoy, Cathal Gunning here. There is massive talent here. Neil McManus has always been absolutely class. Burke has really come into it as well. They have good players here. I mean, I think from Antrim, the fact that they beat Laois, I think the pressure's off them. I think they can just go on to Leinster Hurling Championship and really express themselves. And Corrigan Park is going to be a difficult place to go, particularly for one or two of the Leinster teams who are maybe looking a little bit vulnerable. So I wouldn't be all surprised if Antrim did pull up an upset here. I mean, their first round game against Dublin, I think, could be huge. I mean,
at home as well.
At home as well. And I mean, we've alluded to it here at Parnell Park, how that game finished. Antrim did have an awful lot of wasteful shot selection during that game as well that Darren Gleeson was rueful of after the game. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I mean, that's a massive game for both Antrim and Dublin. One win's there, momentum has been built. So, I mean, whoever loses on the back foot. But I think from Antrim's perspective, I think it's been a good league. The fact now that the league is going to basically kind of update again in terms of the likes of the Limericks coming into 1B next season. Again, it'll elevate the opposition that Antrim will be playing. But again, there's an awful lot of talent here. I'm looking forward to seeing Keelan Malloy as well. I think he's an outstanding talent here. Very versatile, can play, forward line, wing back, midfield, and I think he could be one to watch, certainly. So, no, all looking fairly rosy for Antrim heading into the Leinster Championship, and we'll have a preview of that in the next few weeks. I suppose Westmeath Laois, we haven't mentioned them yet here, Kieran. They played in FPD Semple Stadium last Saturday. a massive cracker. I mean, scores aplenty here, and really it was only until Keys' goal on the 63 minutes that really kind of broke this game out. I mean, both teams had good periods of pressure, but unfortunately for Laois, they're looking at Division 2A next season.
Yeah, really big step down from looking at the game. I think at Laois were the better team earlier on. They rushed into an 8-3 lead after 12 minutes, but 2 minutes later, a quick 1-2 from Westmeath on the back level, and there's actually only a point in it at half time. And I think it was tit for tat all the way along the second half until that goal, Owen Key's goal, as you said, Mark. I think from there, Westmeath nursed it along. Actually, Derek McNicholas, who I think had been out of the camp, was back in and scored a late brace just to, I suppose, give him a bit of breathing space. I think I questioned Westmeath and taking beating after beating in the league against big teams. You'd wonder what good it was doing them, but I suppose look to turn up. Laois have, I suppose, had some up and down performances in the league. I think the first game against Bray, they were woeful. I think they've built on that a bit. They did have a very good minor team last year, which I think Willie Maher will need to integrate into that team. But have some quality players. Stephen Maher. I think even rolling a goal, gets up and down for some scores. There is still quality in Laois, and you just worry. If they don't have a very big or a good Joe McDonagh campaign this year, you'd worry about him going forward, that the slip could continue, because there's some very, very good teams in 2A as well, as we know. We've talked about it this year. Hopefully they'll have a good McDonagh campaign upcoming next weekend, actually. For Westmeath, they've secured Division 1 for next year. I think I struggle to have Westmeath improved since last year. Joe Fortune's second year. Sometimes it's harder in the second year to gain momentum, but quality players, and Killian Doyle and his brother Kieran Doyle actually had 15 points between them. As I said, Owen Keys 1-1, Boyle 1-2, and look, they'd be delighted they probably won that playoff game, but for Laois, you'd worry for the future.
It's a disappointing result for Laois. I mean, for Bill Maher as well. He couldn't disclose the fact after the match. Again, he could see that Laois had actually probably produced one of their better performances of the league, but really didn't reflect their dominance on the scoreboard, and probably key. I mean, Stephen Maher with 8 points was kind of a key one. Keys as well with 5. Roland hits the goal late on, a point in the difference. But I suppose, again, it's going to be shark infested, I think, that Joe McDonagh Cup. I mean, Laois are coming in pretty vulnerable now, with 0 for 6 in terms of their league form. Again, they're going to be facing teams here, likes of Kildare, likes of Offaly, Kerry, Carlow. I mean, it is going to be fairly competitive. No team in that bunch is really going to fear Laois. No disrespect to Laois, but I think Laois are going to have to earn that respect of these teams pretty quickly here, Kieran.
Yeah, we've talked about it all year. Some serious quality, all vying to come up, all wanting to play, Liam McCarthy hurling. You can compare it to the championship soccer in England. It's probably the hardest division to come out of, and I think you could say 2A is like that now.
Because they don't want to hang over there in 2A, because the quality of teams, we even seen it with Down and Derry as well. They did absolutely give teams a real rattle in that league. So, but I suppose going back to Westmeath, I think the pleasing part for Westmeath here, it was nip and tuck. I know Keys gets the goal, but Roland's goal at the end puts a 1-point game. Killian Doyle goes off, but then we got the clutch plays here from Dara Clinton's free, absolutely huge. But also, as you said, Derek McNicholas' 2 points down the stretch here, really kind of settling the game down a little bit right at the end. So I think from Joe Fortune's perspective, the way they closed out the game, I thought was probably a pleasing aspect. David Glennon as well, I thought was pretty prominent there in a leadership role. And they got goals at vital times, particularly in the first half as well, keeping that scoreboard ticking over. But, they have taken heavy knocks. But again, Killian Doyle being very dependent in terms of his scoring here. So it'll be interesting to see what Joe Fortune and management and team, how they can evolve this into the Leinster Hurling Championship, because the standard is going to be through the roof here.
Yeah, it's hard to see, can they progress it anymore? I think when you look at the likes of Kildare and the upward curve they're on, there's a lot of work going on in the background. Their underage teams are playing in the Kilkenny Hurling League, so they're getting great exposure. I see the Kildare 20s are nice, really impressive win as well. So there's younger guys coming too behind us, and I think you could see Kildare being a top hurling county in the next few years. But for Westmeath, they probably still are a dual county. I think football is number one there. To get any further, they're going to need support from their own county board, and I suppose to improve hurling in the county, to take the jump from where they're at now to go any further. There's big steps to be taken. So for me, I just have question marks as how much further Westmeath can go. I think they'll be happy to be in Division 1 again next year. But I think we've seen it with Laois. Laois have been battling for the last 8-10 years to stay in Division 1, and I think finally caught up with them. And you'd probably say you could see the same fate for Westmeath in years to come.
Yeah, I mean, there is work going on there quite clearly in Westmeath, particularly in the schools levels here, particularly around the Athlone area, particularly in Mullingar area of Westmeath as well. So I think it's going to be a slow burner here, I suppose, with Joe Fortune. He has what he has right now anyway. They may be able to pull an upset, result like they did against Wexford last season. But I suppose the cat's out of the bag here a little bit, Kieran, as well, isn't it? From Westmeath's perspective, I think teams know about Killian Doyle. They kind of know about the Westmeath kind of line of attack. So I think it'll be interesting just to see how they would adapt to the Leinster Hurling Championship season. But clearly next season will be a tough ask, particularly with who may be coming up from 2A. And I suppose we can finish off with that here, Kieran. In terms of the semi-final of 2A was in Tullamore last Saturday. Kerry probably produced one of their better performances of the season, but fair to say their accuracy was way off and gave Offaly a lifeline at half-time, and Offaly didn't have to be asked twice to kind of make the adjustments to win by 4 points and face Kildare in the 2A final this Saturday.
Yeah, I think they were probably evenly matched, but as you mentioned, Mark, Kerry were very wasteful. I think when you're looking back at the video analysis next week, it'll be for painful viewing. 12 first half wides and 9 in the second half. I think, Kerry were very good in the middle third. Jordan Conway, great game, 4 points. Padraig Boyle having 7 frees and scoring 8. Sorry, Shane Conway had 4 points, Jordan Conway 2 points. I think especially in the first half, Offaly, 8 of their first half points were from frees, so I think Kerry had the potential to be, way on top had they converted their chances. I think they'll be probably kicking themselves, but I think Kerry have been a little bit like this in the league to date. They've been up and down. For me, I think you look at the likes of Kildare and Offaly have been a little bit more consistent game on game. Kerry have kind of imploded at times. Kind of wondering, are Kerry, looking with, at the future, the Joe McDonough? I think really that is their target for this year. They've been so close in the last few years, and I think, without suggesting that they're pulling the handbrake some bit, that they're, I think that's their target for this year is Joe McDonough. They've been bridesmaids for the last few years. I think this is the year, and I think the pressure is on Malone for this year to produce that. But I think for Offaly, they have their own injury concerns, injury problems, going into a League 2A final against Kildare, who they only faced there last week. I think it'll be a really, really close game in Portlaoise. I think the only downside for Offaly is they're going to be playing 7 weeks in a row. Their league final this weekend and straight into Joe McDonough action next weekend. So we've the top tier teams complaining about a 2-week gap between league and championship. For the next group down, the League 2 teams, they're straight into it. So I think if you're, looking at levels of fairness, you can't say that's one bit fair for the League 2 teams to go straight in from league final to Joe McDonough action. I think it's just a disrespect from the GAA's point of view. Why they can't treat the Division 1 teams, Division 2 teams similarly. I just don't know.
I mean, cruciate ligament injuries have been highlighted significantly, particularly from certain GA counties, no more so than Offaly. I mean, if you look at the news of poor Oisin Kelly, works his way back into full fitness only to get another cruciate ligament. Michael Dignan has highlighted this on the Irish Independent. Michael Verney, superb journalist, basically with the report. And it really does kind of tell the tale of the tape. Oisin Kelly out. Also, Ross Ravenhill, the Dura clubman, he's out as well, who would be a significant cog in Johnny Kelly's plans here as well. So, and besides the 2021 All-Ireland football final winners, there's 3 of them out with ACL. So, I mean, Cormac Egan as well and John Furlong as well, who would be great hurlers as well. So I think from an Offaly perspective, it's going to be a daunting schedule, isn't it, really? 7 weeks. I mean, Stephen Lumphy highlighted this before the down game when Kerry were playing in Austin Stack Park. I mean, I don't care what team you are, 7 weeks on the trot with injury suspensions. For Johnny Kelly and management, I think this is going to be a serious, serious challenge here to even get into a semi-final, given the teams, as you said, Kerry here have an awful lot of scope for improvement given the performance last weekend. You'd also have Carlow kind of waiting in the ryegrass here along with Laois and Kildare as well, who are resurgent here. So I think from an Offaly perspective here, it's daunting, but I suppose first things first, a League 2 final against 2A final against Kildare here. Massive opportunity to get back to top flight hurling at least anyway for next season and see how the season goes after that.
Yeah, which a lot of people say is probably where they belong. They took a downturn the last few years and they're, slowly making their way back up. A lot of work on the background, probably no more than they deserve. But I suppose you don't get handed these chances, you have to take them. I think they might be, at the minute, especially reliant on Owen Cahill, 13 points again out of the 23 last week. Charlie Mitchell, really young guy coming in, getting 2 points, really impressive. We do know that the minor team from last year, I think, will yield a few players to eventually join this setup. The likes of Dan Ravenhill and Screeney. Adam Screeney, yeah. So, I think there's some good young guys coming as well. And what a huge opportunity for Offaly to go back up, playing against the bigger teams. But I suppose the challenge being the playing so many weeks in a row, they have injuries at the minute, and the chances of players being added to that injury list is fairly high. I just don't see where the room is. If you have a bad game, there isn't much time to put things right if needs to be. They're just kind of going to go from week to week from now. And I suppose you would give the advantage to teams who have a slight break, like the Carlow. Kildare obviously have a 1 week break last week, and the likes of Laois, who I suppose will have time to take stock and go again. So look for Offaly. I suppose this is where they want to be, and they're only 70 minutes away from Division 1 hurling.
That over dependence on Owen Cahill is extraordinary, really. He scored 70 points here, Kieran, out of 121 during the season, which really tells the tale of the tape here for Johnny Kelly and management here, who's the older fulcrum. Obviously, Nally has come in with some decent cameos, and other people are going to have to get involved here in the scoring stakes, because Kildare coming in after the bye week, courtesy of their draw against Offaly in Tullamore in the last round of the league. I mean, who do you fancy here in this 2A final? I think it's a very intriguingly poised final. I mean, you have Offaly, who said, look, they belong in the top flight, but you have the resurgence of Kildare with David Herity as manager. There's been solid foundational work going on there in the last few years, I think, in Mullally, in terms of his management of the team. Who do you fancy coming out of that game and getting promoted to the top flight next season?
I suppose both counties are similar in that there's a lot of work on the background in both setups. I think both have been highlighted. I think you look back to last week's game, I think Offaly, its spells were better than Kildare. They might have been a bit wasteful. Kildare might feel they got a bit lucky coming away to draw. But look, it's a final, so teams can react differently. I think just the extra week or the week's break will be an advantage to Kildare. Offaly obviously missing the guys they're missing. I'm going to tip Kildare. They've been unbeaten. They've impressed me. There's a lot of work on there, and I think Offaly will be hungry to get back up. But I think there'll be serious hunger in Kildare to take the step to Division 1 hurling, to take them to new heights.
Yeah, I think they've just really built in the last few years, haven't they? And I even think of Naas in terms of their progression, in terms of county finals, particularly the intermediate final win season before, and also in terms of how they gave Ballyhale an absolute rattle in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship final. So, I mean, you can see the grassroots, you can see the fundamentals are all there. I think it'll just be intriguing on Sunday here, Kieran, just in terms of how both management teams set up. There will be adjustments based on what transpired in that round 5 game in Tullamore. So I'm going to tip Kildare here. I think it's, given the freshness of Kildare, as long as Kildare, the occasion doesn't get to the players, I think I will slightly edge it to them. I think Offaly do have a few questions to answer, particularly in scoring, particularly if Owen Cahill is curtailed here, and if Kildare can be disciplined defensively where the score is coming from. I think Kildare here. I think like James Burke. I think Deegan as well. They're big players here for Kildare, have been in the last few years, and I mean it'd be a massive tonic for hurling here as well. Kildare, look at the catchment area, look at the population, look at the towns in Kildare. Football team are in Division 2. Look, it's a proud footballing county, but my God, if we could get maybe Kildare as a hurling county here, that's a huge revenue stream here for GAA, particularly heading into particularly your Joe McDonough, certainly, but also, kind of going into bigger games. So, yeah, I'll slightly tip Kildare, but I think that is a standout game this weekend. I suppose, Kieran, we might leave it there. Many thanks for your time this evening. I suppose next week we'll review the 2A hurling final between Kildare and Offaly. Maybe run the rule over 2A as well. I mean, we kind of glanced at it in terms of Kerry, Carlow as well. There was Derry down, but also looking really into Joe McDonough Cup as well, maybe doing a preview there, and also a preview of the Limerick-Kilkenny final. I suppose until then, Kieran, have a great weekend, and sure we'll chat next week.
Same to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. If you liked what you heard in this podcast, why not subscribe to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast on either Amazon, Spotify, YouTube or Twitter platforms. You can also follow me at Hawkeye Sidekick on Facebook and Twitter for the latest sporting opinions, articles and reports.